Welcome to Vendée Radio. It is a great pleasure today to be joined by my friend Dr. Russell, who is a recurrent guest with Vendée Radio and always valued for offering his penetrating insight and lucidity on events in church and state. And today, Dr. Russell, who is a commentator, Catholic author and journalist with The Remnant, Crisis and other publications, is here to talk about the current situation in the world with the crisis in the church, with the COVID pandemic and the political responses to that, the economic consequences, the social consequences, and the deterioration of the social fabric, particularly in the United States recently, and situating this in a panorama that he believes that will culminate in the reign of Our Lady. So, Dr. Russell, welcome back.
Thank you for having me on. I'm here at a farm, and so there may be some interruptions of chickens or peacocks or maybe cats making sounds and sort of thing. So apologies to the viewer. It's strange.
Joys of lockdown rural life.
Yeah, it's strange to. I was thinking about this earlier today about how sort of. There's a term from Hannah Arendt, a famous term when she saw Eichmann in Jerusalem, the banality of evil. And so, we reflect on these other events, these attacks in the church, the 30 Years' War, the French Revolution, the Russian Revolution, and now we have like these groups, Antifa, Black Lives, and this sort of thing. And there's a sort of sense of mediocrity about it. I mean, these people are being protected by the police while they tear down these statues and smash them, and they have the endorsement of all these corporations. And there is this persecution of the church, but it's kind of cowardly fly-by-night, throw paint on the statue of Our Lady or something like that. They're not, they seem incapable of, like, I don't know, some of the horrors of the Spanish Civil War, for example. I mean, certainly we may see something like that coming, but there is, one of these things that these rioting and vandalism points to is a sort of the spiritual exhaustion that evil generates.
Yes, exactly. The fact that evil ultimately destroys itself, and we can take great hope and consolation in that fact. The human material today is simply lower quality, and so, as you say, the kind of degenerate anarchist activist in Portland is less of a threat in a sense, in a physical sense, than hardened Spanish factory workers that have been agitated and radicalized by communist agents. But I think many listeners will be familiar with the Catholic reading of the modern age, of what some have called the fifth age of the Church, the status afflictionis, the age of afflictions, which began with the decay of the late Middle Ages, the so-called Renaissance, and then the pseudo-Reformation. And one of the ways to remember these three great revolutions is the 317s. So 1517, Martin Luther, 1717, the union of the Grand Lodge of Freemasonry in London, the Enlightenment, and then the French Revolution, and then 1917, the Bolshevik Revolution. The Brazilian Catholic author, thinker, Dr. Plinio Oliveira, wrote about an aborning fourth revolution, and he believed that this had begun to take place in his lifetime with the social and cultural revolution of the 1960s. And for him, the characteristics of the Fourth Revolution are an anarchist. It's an anarchist revolution, which ultimately leads to a form of tribalism, because, referring to the nature of evil, the mysterium iniquitas, even the Third Revolution has a certain logos with a small l, in exalting state, for example, and the worker collectivity. But the Fourth Revolution dissolves even that. You see the aborning Fourth Revolution with the synthesis of Marxism and Freudianism in thinkers like Wilhelm Reich and Herbert Marcuse. Herbert Marcuse, who said that the youth revolt of '68 is, quote, a rebellion at the same time moral, political, sexual, a total rebellion. It originates in the individuals. Young people are willing to sacrifice a lot of material goods to lead a life finally governed by freed, vital instincts, end quote. So the Fourth Revolution is an internal revolution within the Italian Marxist Antonio Gramsci critiqued the fact that factory worker might be a revolutionary in the workplace, but was a reactionary in family life by still cleaving to a family hierarchy, for example. And so what needed to happen was a revolution within man himself, where reason as the highest faculty was overthrown into the passions, which perfectly reverses the work of grace in the human being. So do you see our current travails as part of this Fourth Revolution continuing, or its results consequences?
Well, I think I'm looking here at some of the writings of Venerable Bartholomew Holhauser of the 17th century, and I think that one of the things I've learned is that a lot of this prophecy, and then even prophecy in the Bible, it's ultimately a mystery in a certain sense, and so I'm not claiming to be an expert on this sort of thing, or my take is the authoritative take. I certainly could be wrong, but one of the things that he talks about his fifth age of the church, which you mentioned, is that there is going to be a desolation of the church. And this is something that you and I were kind of talking about before we started recording, that I talked about some other Catholic journalists, is a lot of people today, in the church, who are traditionalists or conservatives, just feel totally lost. And it's, some people would think, this group or that group or this, magazine or this newspaper is going to have a message, but it seems to be that in many ways we're adrift. People feel lost. There's this desolation. And the second word he used to describe it is one of humiliation. And so I think most of us, especially with all these scandals in the church, where the claims made by, French revolutionaries or Marxists about like corrupt priests and whatever, that at the time you could say in the 18th or 19th century or 20th century, early 20th century, it's like, oh no, this is not true, and maybe largely right. All the dirty laundry of the church is aired, or at least the church's members, and there has been this tremendous humiliation. But one of the things he mentions that's going to guide during this period of Fifth Age of the church, which I think we still are in, is the Council of Trent, and I kind of read that as being the perennial teaching of the church. So I think that more than turning to like blogs and podcasts, even though we're doing a podcast right now, is to be rooted in the traditional doctrine and teaching of the church. Yes. And I think that's definitely, the guide. And also, you mentioned this attack on, the human personality. So you have the dethroning. We've lost all our kings. God himself has been dethroned. Christ the King has been dethroned, but reason has been dethroned. And it's very much tied to, sort of the anthropology behind this discussion of the Immaculate Heart of Mary. And the Immaculate Heart of Mary, in his work, the Admirable Heart of Mary, is not just referring to her heart of flesh, but this kind of where a spiritual heart as well. And the corporeal heart, which we have all passions and emotions. What we need to focus on, I think, in this time, and this is, I will have some kind of Judy stuff, I promise, all these apparitions and the Immaculate Heart conversion.
Yes.
It's conversion on heart, and to try to make the Sacred Heart. That's the whole point behind it. People can talk endlessly about the consecration of Russia and this and that, but, as Catholics, we're called holy and to know the truth. So, yes, I don't know exactly what stage in the revolution we are in, definitely shifting into, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, it was Professor Plinio talks like the fifth or the final age, which is the open practice of occultism and Satanism. So we definitely have that in our midst. I think I'm a little bit older than you, and so I remember a time where even just minor eruptions of stuff in the 1980s panic, and we're saying, we're big trouble, this album cover has this occult symbol on it or something like that, but you see this stuff, it's pervasive throughout the culture. So I think that the response to this this unsettling of our personality and unsettling of our our soul, and where most of us are slaves to our passions, we don't have a good sort of foundation on which we can work. And so, like, I think we've maybe talked about this before in another interview, but, John Locke's idea of a tabula rasa, that is not true, but it has become true for us in a certain sense that the traumatic effects of things in families, traumatic effects of living in a post-industrial society, our minds and our hearts, like these blank slates that can be written on, can be manipulated. And so we are kind of prepared from youth to be manipulated. It's pretty, I don't want an old man post here, but especially this youngest generation, I've seen among Gen Z where take the COVID thing extremely seriously. And so someone is working at a grocery store or something, they're very young, they're very serious about, you need to do this, you need to do that, you need to do the other thing, we need to get on Zoom and not have, university classes or whatever. And so this newest generation, and I'm sure they plays a certain role in this, has been completely malleable and completely socially engineered.
Yes, I think it's helpful to recall a quite distinction between the virtue of studiousness and the vice of curiosity. It's sort of salacious interest in as you say, these sort of current affairs, and allowing them to go beyond, to eclipse your own devotional life, for example. If as a Catholic you are spending more time reading about the intricacies of Pope Francis's, latest heterodox statement rather than praying, then that's a problem, which is not to minimize those problems that are present in the church at all. It's just to say that for the devil, the revolutionary already possesses. He's not out to get them. He's out to get you. He's out to get those Catholics who are living lives of grace. And so he will look for these ways, these very cunning ways, to make us fall. And so the vice of curiosity is certainly one of those, I think. But to return to the sequence of revolutions, this revolutionary process, I think another way to consider the shift to the fourth revolution is the shift from modernity to post-modernity or hyper-modernity. Modernity is the Enlightenment, is the Asian. Post-modernity is the dismissal of reason or any truth claim as gambits for power, and the dismissal of all universals in accord with this chaos theory. And this is something philosophers like Jürgen Habermas have shown themselves to have been very panicked about, and have tried to enlist the church to buttress the Enlightenment project. But nevertheless, there's this disillusion of the political form of society, the state, along with the disintegration of reason, which is the sovereign faculty of the human soul. And Professor Planillo very interestingly predicted this will be a tribal revolution. On the one hand, it will be the collapse of the dictatorship of the proletariat as a result of a new crisis by which the hypertrophied state will be the victim of its own hypertrophy. I don't know if we've ever had a dictatorship of the proletariat, or instead it's been a dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. But nevertheless, this tribal aspect is very interesting. He is right that the revolution, which previously took as its revolutionary subject the proletariat, has a new proletariat, which are feminists, pacifists, ecologists, ethnic liberationists, marginalized minorities, drug addicts, homosexuals, and to endow these so-called oppressed minorities with a revolutionary consciousness. So it's a revolutionary metamorphosis whose goal is the same, the dissolution of the Christian social order and ultimately the destruction of civilization. You see the manifestation of this tribal revolution in the increase of piercings, tattoos, and the reversion to tribal mates. With people think of sort of free love, that it's this revolutionary concept, that it's a promiscuous thing, which it is, but also it's very tribal in that you tend to have males who are very sexually promiscuous, a small group of males who mate with a large group of females, which is exactly what you see in tribes. This mask coercion is a big escalation, and again seems part of that fourth revolution. Tribes wear masks, particularly in ritual contexts, to dissolve individual identities and personalities in the collective consciousness. And there does seem to be something of Rousseau's supreme will the will with a capital W, which has assumed into itself all wills. Of course, recently we had what my friend calls the Third Vatican Council, the Amazon Synod, which seemed to introduce this synodal church, this kind of church suited to post-modernity, to the Fourth Revolution. And coincidentally or not, it was a very tribal affair. So I think if you go deeper into Dr. Plineo's analysis, he talks about revolutionary depths. So revolution occurs on three levels, three depths. It begins with with revolution in tendencies, human modes of behavior, fashion, language, culture. Then it rises to revolutionary ideas, where those tendencies become formalized in ideologies. It rises through the revolutionary terrain to the revolution in facts. So you could say that, for example, use the example of the Second Revolution, you had the revolutionary tendencies, which were the softening of Catholic culture and its extreme sensuality and the kind of corruption of the Baroque, for the immorality in the French court, for example, which gave rise to the revolutionary ideas, which were those Enlightenment, which then birthed the revolution in the facts, which was the actual execution of the king and the complete de-Christianization of France. So in terms of the Fourth Revolution, I think we've seen the revolution in the tendencies. That was the sexual revolution, and it's still continuing, and it's continuing with homosexuality. And the revolutionary ideas, well, you see that now with the basically targeted attack on what remain on Western civilization and on the, let's say, the white male, on white power structures, as they're called. So how long it'll be until the revolution, the facts and the state and the remaining social institutions of the West are dissolved, remains to be seen. But that does seem to be following that predicted course.
Yes, you make a number of excellent points there. I'm trying to think of which one I would respond to first. I think that what's interesting, doing some research for this interview about the reign of the Immaculate Heart, is that allegedly the great monarch who will come during the reign of the Heart will be a descendant of Louis IX, St. Louis, King of France. And in America, we have this issue, this big contentious statue that is present in St. Louis, Missouri, and there's a desire to remove it. I think, there are a lot of reasons why European people and European civilization are detested. I think for the purpose of our discussion, one of the primary reasons is because it has been a vehicle for the Christianization of the world, and that there is a demonic hatred there. Now, that does not discount certain ethnic rivalry that may be present there. And interestingly, you have in America this proliferation of different cults and this sort of thing, and where there's a lot of elements of inciting or wanting racial conflict, and this is one of the predictions of the end times or end time situation is nation will rise against nation. And it doesn't just mean like, France will rise against Germany or something like that, but race will rise against race. There'll be this conflict there, and that out of that chaos will come some sort of order. And there is, I forget whether I talked about this with you or Tim Kelly, there is this weird occult desire to return back to the state of like Noah or Adam and Eve, where you have these humans who are, as Count Kalergi had mentioned, look like the Egyptians. This idea, I'm not saying because someone is, multiple ethnic background or something that they're bad or something, but like that, for whatever reason, there's a desire for that. One, on the practical level, it just makes us more conformable, because I'm like, well, am I, German, or am I Nigerian, or what am I? I don't know, but I'm going to buy Apple product, drink Schweppes or whatever you drink in England and sort of thing, and just sort of be a consumer without that'll be my consumer identity. Watch Star Wars and all that. What's interesting too is that you see on the right, especially on the internet, this desire to turn back to a tribal state. And I don't want to be too go back to my old charismatic days or something, but I was praying to Our Lady of Sorrows about this and received, at least I think, some wisdom there, where the ideal, or like how European people lived when they traveled over the Urals into Europe, is not the ideal form of life. That is not the pinnacle of Christian civilization, or how pre-Indo-European hunter-gatherers lived in Europe with the kings and bears and that sort of thing. And, there's a lot of, those cave paintings are very beautiful. There are elements of that culture which are, on a natural level, admirable. But our goal, I would say, is not like the 19th century or something the Victorian did, but that, to reach a state of a civilization of true love rooted in charity and concord. And it doesn't mean being effeminate or weak or liberal or this ultra-humanist or something like that. And so I think that's we have a dialectic going on the right and the left where, Antifa wants to return to this tribal state, but many on the right do.
Yes.
And, many people are pulled, people I know are pulled in that direction. It's interesting what you mentioned about the masks as well, the anonymity, the erasure of identity.
And the Imago Dei.
Yeah, absolutely. It's probably a sacrilegious movie, but I'll mention Prophecy. It's from the mid-1990s where the angel Gabriel has a second revolution or in heaven or something. And so there's probably all kinds of Gnostic weird stuff in there. But one of the interesting things is the character, the devil in there, he hates humans. And the demons, they all hate us, and they call us monkeys and stuff like that. And that's some of the argument given for why there was this rebellion of some of these major demons and whatever. They hated this idea of the incarnation. They hated the idea of Our Lady. They hate these material animals, rational animals that we are. And definitely, there's this desire to chop up the body. I mean, there's the Terrence Malick movie, some sort of, I don't know if you know, he's a director of a kind of progressive, quasi-Episcopalian, quasi-Catholic director. But in his movie To the Wonder, there's a scene where there's a X-ray of, it's some sort of birth control device that goes into the uterus that prevents conception. But it's interesting because he's a more progressive director, but he shows how ugly that is in there, in the X-ray, and how this is something unnatural. This is some bizarre thing that's present. So I think that's all entirely correct. And it definitely needs to be that we're in a time where, and maybe we'll get a little bit into this, but if you look at Revelation 12, where the followers of our Lord, Our Lady, the woman flees into the wilderness in there. So the woman clothed the sun, that's Our Lady, but it also could be an image of the church as well. I'm not trying to add ad hoc, but I think that the church fathers talk about that. So I think the church is in the wilderness at this time. Those who follow the commandment of God, her seed, are going to be persecuted. And there's this, image of like the devil falling to the earth and, knocking the stars from the sky. Interestingly, there's that famous Remnant article by Patrick Archbold about in, I think it was 2016 or 2017, the constellation Virgo was situated, so it was the woman clothed the sun, the stars above its head. But interestingly, the constellation Draco sends out meteor showers. And so the dragon in the sky. And more recently, in years like 1933, you might know what happened in 1933.
Yeah, January 1933, yes.
And 1946, 2011, 2018, and this happens right out of apparitions. And that, we have this comet Neowise. I'm not trying to be superstitious or anything like that, but even the scriptures say, the stars kind of provide a story for us of
the church
in history.
Yeah, the physical bodies are governed by the angels. Sorry.
Yeah, no, so we definitely have this, I think, this persecution going on. I was talking with a friend of mine who's a Catholic writer and another Catholic writer he knows who's trying to be Catholic especially this year, is just undergoing tremendous persecution. And interestingly, the Revelation reminds me of the book of Job, where the devil comes before God and God asks where he was, and he says, I've been wandering the earth. And so, and the book of Tobit as well, and we'll kind of get into this Immaculate Heart and the battle over the family, but, it seems to be we have this tremendous oppression going on throughout the world. We have extraordinary activity, some of it's open, some of it's veiled, and so we are living through, I'm not saying we're living through the end times, but we're living through this time where we have this tremendous persecution of the church. I think in a certain sense this is kind of like given to us, in, these celestial events is like a sign of it.
That's fascinating. I think Dr. Plinio was very insightful to have identified this tribal nature of the revolution in our day, considering the fact that he died in 1995, but several currents converge on the horizon of this fourth revolution: radical psychoanalysis, cultural Marxism, postmodernism, structuralism, indeterminate physics, sociobiology, environmentalism, that's one I didn't mention earlier, veganism, and animalism. This galaxy of theories may best be defined as chaos theory. But this might not be the final revolution. He in his final years, he talked about a fifth revolution, and the fourth revolution marked the beginning of the extinction of lumen rationis, the light of reason, a constant object of Dr. Neo's sociology and philosophy. This is Roberto Di Mattei. He said, quote, "Renunciation of the use of reason was theorized by exponents of postmodern thought, who replaced the rules of thought with magic techniques. Not surprisingly, the new religion being spread since the 70s is characterized by an attraction for an Oriental theories on emptiness and nothing. Its central core consists in merging Eastern religious tenets with Spiritism, with so-called alternative medicine, mantra, yoga, and Zen techniques, African tribal rituals based on hallucinogens." How many Western women today practice yoga, for example? Continued, "In its statement and procedures, the revolution often seems delusional. This is not surprising. The revolution is, properly speaking, a delirium, as clearly shown by the most real manifestation of Protestantism in the French Revolution. Those who refuse the natural order plunge into the realm of chaos, which is the dream, or better, the delirium of the devil. To the degree that Providence allows it, the goal of the revolution is to establish the reign of the devil on earth. That is, the visible presence of the devil, known, served, and glorified as such. What is the role played by UFOs and flying saucers in this ominous scenario? Could they not be the way chosen by the devil to present himself as redeemer of a humanity immersed in chaos and madness? Only saints can penetrate into the abyss of revolutionary mysticism. We leave it at that, limiting ourselves to record the existence of this dark mystery." So he talks about the degeneration into things like gender ideology, the sanctioning of homosexuality, the sin that cries to heaven for vengeance, one of the sins, and that these are all symptoms of, and this preternatural activity, this occultism is part of the aborning fifth revolution, which is open Satanism. And the fourth revolution prepares mankind for that by creating this collective consciousness. He mentions how in the dark atmosphere of nightclubs or in the excitement of rock concerts, consciousness dissolves as collectivity offers the prince of this world a human matter suitable to be animated by his evil influence. In these ambiences, Satanism, demonolatry, finds its natural humus. The lowest degree in which human nature is broken and dissolved is what the devil needs in order to achieve his end, a counterfeit hypostatic union between Satan and the tribal community, which is the antithesis of the hypostatic union between the perfect human nature of Jesus Christ and his perfect divine nature.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I'm thinking of how to phrase this. So there was a Protestant kind of YouTuber named Face Like the Sun, and he had talked about this, how the internet provides the hive mind, that the internet creates this link. And I think there's something, this may sound a little bit out there, demonic about the internet itself. And that let me give this as an example. So where I live, traditionally we would have people, fishermen, get on the river and go float in a raft or a boat and fish. My mother and I were driving yesterday, and we drove by the river, and it was just full of people. Now, how did that happen? Population in my state, but how did that happen where this meme gets out there where, everyone knows to go, wants to go hiking and wants to go float on the river and do this stuff, whereas, 10, 20 years ago they didn't. It's because Facebook and Twitter and whatever else, and they see Instagram, they see people out there doing things, and this meme enters consciousness. And so, Our Lady of Keto, Our Lady of Good Success, talks about, this wave, and a priest I know had referred to that. I mean, that's what the internet provides, is this permeation of the airwaves with evil, and it gets into people's minds, and it totally penetrates it. So yeah, the idea of this collective hive mind, these kind of brainwashed and easily malleable people is there. And I think it's something I was going to say to something you said earlier. I think we live in a postmodern age, or what's called a post-ironic age, where nihilism is the core, but above that, it's like, we must do these things. So like you go out, you talk to Antifa, and they're like, Black Lives Matter. And you're like, well, actually more white people are killed. It doesn't matter, right? It's sort of this doctrine without reason. Yeah, so reason has been extinguished, and now we follow these maxims. Like a friend of mine described the writings of Derrida as like this. He just makes these statements you're supposed to be overawed by. If you begin to question them or whatever, things just got to fall apart. I think, without a doubt, that this idea of the hive mind or collective mind is something that is going to be utilized. You have, like, I refer to it as kind of like a water slide. I don't know what you call them in Great Britain, but water slide, and people slide down it, where people are just in a conveyor belt or water slide to hell, in the sense of like they are manufactured from youth to conform to a certain, lifestyle or whatever, and they're just kind of sent out. And so you have these people who, you could even describe it like a mass oppression or mass possession as well, where there are the Walking Dead. There's this famous article in the Atlantic Monthly, I think, in America. It's like, Are Zombies Ourselves? And it's about how all these zombie films are about ourselves. They're about the long-term psychological effects of, using the internet, of psychiatric drug use, of, in America we have this thing, CBD. It's marijuana. And you can tell people I know, you could tell when they're high on CBD. They say it doesn't get you high, but you can definitely tell people I know that use it. They kind of got this kind of leering look as well. And so this mass of kind of slaves who are simply going to be manipulated is definitely true. And the last thing I'll say is that, ironically, on the right, there's this argument, well, yoga is the real Indo-European, religion, or Hinduism is the Aryan religion, and there's this religion we got to get back to. We got to get back behind Christianity. And so we're getting hit from both sides. And, there are writings of Julius Evola, it talks about this Indo-European, this early Indo-European religion we got to get back to. And interestingly, people like Steve Bannon read Evola.
Yes.
And, so that we don't realize, I think, how far we are gone. Even this summer, I've noticed, I think you and I talked about this off air one time, a further step toward degeneracy in the clothing women wear. Yes. It's almost unbelievable. It's like, it's bizarre. It's something where I remember when I was younger, if a girl dressed like that in high school or junior high, something would be this big deal, and the parents have to come in, what's wrong, there's something going on at home or something like that. And now it's like totally normal, and no one thinks anything of it.
Zombie films and literature in our culture. I think we could do a whole podcast on that. I remember reading in Culture Wars about it, but suffice to say, I think it's so popular with a lot of young people. It resonates because the apocalypse for them has already happened. People are zombies, as you say, because they're governed by their passions, and they've overthrown their reasons, which, as I say, is to reverse the operation of grace and make it extremely, let's say, difficult. Not impossible, but difficult for grace to operate, to transform, infuse. And so they see this wasteland where that's happened. Another very, the defining feature of a satanic culture, particularly according to, this is something Thaddeus Kaczynski wrote about in his recent book, Modernity as Apocalypse. The defining feature of a satanic culture is human sacrifice. And Joseph de Maistre argues that sacrifice possesses its own logic, which is that of offering what is noblest to God for our own justification. So sacrifice is a permanent feature of human society. And so you will see this attempt to keep offering that which is noblest to God, and that feeds into Anselm's theory of atonement. The human sacrifice you see in pagan times has been replaced by the total offering of Jesus Christ, and by being identified with him through baptism as he offers himself to the Father. So Christianity didn't simply get rid of human sacrifice as if it were nothing more than a moral corruption. It got rid of it by making it no longer necessary through replacing it with grace. De Maist argues that with the retreat from grace, human sacrifice, both intentional and cosmic, must begin again on a mass scale. And if that seems far-fetched, just consider the blood that cries out from the ground, which is surely a sacrifice to pleasure. As Malcolm Muggeridge said, the orgasm has replaced the cross as the object of Western man's longing and devotion. And this is human sacrifice on a mass, just as de Maist and so many other Christian thinkers warned in this revolutionary process. So here we're seeing the fifth revolution in tendencies well underway already. We're seeing it in things like the Dutroux affair and Epstein scandal, and all the signs that occult activity, the Nexium cult, the occult activity, child sacrifice, horrors beyond horrors are taking place, especially amongst the powerful, the oligarchs. So how long is it before these tendencies start to inform ideas about Satanism, which then leads to the establishment of a public cult of Satan? We don't know, but obviously this be a greater motivation than ever to pray and be braced for quite how bad things might get. I think it was the Colombian philosopher Nicolas Gomez Davila who said, modernity will not be punished, modernity is punishment. The worst punishment God could give us would just be to leave us to our own to the consequences of our own sinful actions.
Yeah, that's an excellent point that's made, and you kind of see, I see that being back in my hometown. This sort of, a lot of people move to my state and my town and thinking to escape from California or back east or something like that we call the Eastern Seaboard, and they sit here and drink all day on the porch. There is this civilizational exhaustion, and I think you mentioned that quote from Malcolm Muggeridge, but I've noticed, especially among young people, and I'm not trying to be ironic myself, but like beyond that, like that sort of stuff, sins of the flesh are born now, or they're commonplace. It's sort of like,
they become ever more depraved because masturbation is actually a greater sin than fornication. Yeah,
there's it's sort of like there's this something or this like spiritual deadness, this lack of there's this irony where you have all this debauched behavior on one hand, and then you have all this sort of like bizarre asexual behavior as well among the younger generations, filtering up to the older. I guess that there's a couple things I want quickly before whenever we're at the end, and one of them is a comment that Sister Lucy supposedly made to Cardinal Caffarra, which was the final battle would be between Our Lady and Satan about marriage.
Yes.
And it's something interesting. We have a priest here in America called Father Chad Ripperger. I don't know if you've heard any of his talks on the internet.
Of course, yes.
But he had mentioned that the rival of the Immaculate Heart is a particular demon. I mentioned his name, but it's in the Book of Tobit. And the Book of Tobit is a book about marriage and marriage initially frustrated, and the purity of Tobias, which is symbolized by him burning the heart and the gall of the fish that Thiel points out to him, and driving that particular demon who's in that book away to Egypt, interestingly, and where he was bound. And the battle between the Immaculate Heart of Our Lady and other demons as well over the issue of marriage and the family. And I thought, reason has been dethroned. We've lost our monarchy and our aristocracy, but the family has been torn to pieces. And that is something that has made so many generations of people pray to the world. There's an interesting analogy someone gave to me who I won't provide too much detail, but he grew up as child in a cult, and he was talking about it, and he had said that there's this famous experiment where they have these rats, and they put them in this cage, and it's a miserable little cage, and then they give them water, and they give them water with cocaine in it. And so, of course, the rats go all the cocaine water and die and have heart attacks, whatever. And then they get some more rats, and they build this really nice cage where a rat would really want to be in, where it's got jungle or whatever the rat's like. And the rats in that cage would not turn toward the cocaine. They just drank there and did rat things, and they had other rat friends and whatever in there. And so I think that part of this, traumatizing of the contemporary self, and you mentioned before on air about how the COVID scare is like this. It creates this tremendous trauma, and the breakdown of the family and marriages produces this as well in the children. And so the children are just individuals there that are just going to be preyed upon by the internet or the oligarchs using these different media tools.
Yes. Well, I'd certainly like to finish on a note of happened and hear some of your thoughts, the reign of Mary. So let's just, de Mattei points out, no historical study is required to understand that today man commits in sin, justifies sin, and lives in a greater state of sin than has ever been seen in history. The greatest scandal is that entire nations have morally defected. Well, witness the appalling scandal of once Catholic Ireland twice voting by around 2/3 for the legalization of sins that cry to heaven for vengeance, infanticide and sodomy, and the inevitable result of this is the punishment from divine justice. Accordingly, one can say that the whole world is heading for one of the most furious clashes with God that history has ever known. The flood was a supreme punishment because of all mankind. Only Noah and his family were saved, but it was also an act of mercy because during the punishment, as St. Peter attested in 1 Peter 3:19, many who otherwise would have been lost, converted before dying. The worst of all evils is not death but sin, and death can sometimes be a grace. There's also an interesting point he raises, the three ages, and this is by no means an article of faith, but the 3 ages, the age of the Father, which saw the deluge of water, the age of the Son, which saw the deluge of blood, and then the age of the Spirit, which we're living in now, which will see a deluge of fire. But certainly there are many, many prophecies that speak of this coming imminent chastisement, which will then purify the world for the reign of Mary, a triumphant era for the Holy Roman Church, and a prodigious increase in the action of the Holy Ghost in her life. The reign of Mary is not, again, an article of faith, but it is something that sits at the junction of hope and faith. I certainly believe that it will happen. Well, there's much to be said on it. I think St. Louis-Marie Grignon de Montfort was perhaps most eloquent, and it's interesting to think about several things. The fact that during his canonization, Pius XII said that, without exaggeration, the Vendée uprising of 1793 was the work of his hands. And so these are all the counter-revolution, which was really begun with that great uprising, was the prefiguring, the foreshadowing of the reign of Mary. And this is something Bishop Schneider has pointed out before, is that we can actually begin the reign of Mary in our hearts now, and that is an anticipation of the reign of Mary in the world to come and the triumph of the Church. It is an article of faith that the gospel will spread to all corners of the earth, which doesn't seem to have happened. There are whole civilizations, great civilizations like China and Japan, which have never become Catholic. So there will be a future triumph of the Church before the final and worst corruption of the Antichrist.
I would say that there's a few points. One is that, supposedly, St. Michael, not just in Revelation 12, but there's a book written, I have it right here, about the argument that the angel of Fatima is St. Michael. St. Michael will play a role in this battle against, and you have that famous vision of Pope Leo XIII, and then the creation of the St. Michael prayer and that exorcism prayer. as well. I'll say it's interesting that supposedly, during this reign or this period of peace, which could be the reign of the Immaculate Heart, republics will be abolished. So, like that was kind of Masonry's role. A lot of people, you and I were talking about this before, got in there. A lot of people are like, oh, it's the Masons, the Masons, the Masons. I mean, most Masonic temples I've seen are in disrepair in the United States. I don't doubt that. It's kind of a friend of mine who, I guess I'll just say, is in TFP. He said, that that's kind of club. That was something that the English-speaking people, especially, Europeans, were charged with as Masonry. I don't doubt they still. I don't doubt they have influence in places like Japan. That's kind of an unexplored avenue, but I think that's kind of Grandpa's club. But that was one of the stages of the revolution, is this overthrow of the old hierarchical system, which is ultimately, thumbing the nose or an act of disrespect toward God. Interestingly, too, like I mentioned, there'll be supposedly a return of a great monarch, and there'll be a return of holiness in the priesthood, which implies that in another Catholic writer we're talking about, it's like it's so hard to find priests. And even, in the traditionalist movement, there is this, so many issues. And part of the reason, and someone explained this to me this way, and it goes back to some things we've been talking about, is that it's hard to find people who are mentally and emotionally capable of that. It's just like you have this wreckage of humanity, and how are you going to pull out that someone who is going to be celibate his entire life? Or, there are good priests, but it's often hard to find them. And interesting, too, last points, is that supposedly during this period of this peace, the 6 Ages of the Church, the power of Islam will be broken.
Yes.
And the question of, Israel as well, that there will be the construction of the temple, which is underway. I mean, they got all the things, Israelis have all the things they want to put in the temple. They're just waiting to kind of, and so the things that this period will be is a period of peace, interior peace, and peace in the world. And so I think that there's a problem, as I mentioned before, that this fetishizing of violence on the internet in both the right and the left, this is not a good, and that this desire for war and conflict and aggression, I think that you'll see this in American restaurants or like gyms. They'll have like CNN on one TV and Fox News on the other, and all this discord and violence it's being promoted is ultimately demonic. I'm not saying it's good to be, a coward or that we shouldn't stand up for certain things, but it's to create discord and violence. And interestingly, even the pagan myths, have that the story of the Trojan War, where it's strife. Eris is not invited to the wedding, and Eris throws this apple in there and causes this, ultimately, which leads to the story of the Trojan War. And, that is ultimately demonic. The devil, there's spirits aboard and that sort of thing. That's kind of what we're being prepared for. Ironically, as I mentioned at the very beginning, though, there's this apathy and fatigue that seems to be weighing it down. Like, why is there not more violence? Like, why is there not more conflict? We probably will see it soon. So I think, I definitely have hope. And then interiorly, the message, as, I've written things critical of John Paul II, that sort of thing, but one of the things I think he said was true is that the message of Fatima, and I think the message of all these, apparitions, is not all this conspiracy or astronomy or this other stuff, but repent and believe in the gospel.
Amen. Well, I think that's a very suitable elevated note to finish. I think we haven't done this subject justice at all, so I'd love to have you back on the show at some point soon, and we can continue talking about the reign of Mary. May the reign of Christ come through Mary.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you.